Thank you very much. I thought I would go ahead and talk because I said some of you came as early as 10:15, and I'd be embarrassed to keep you waiting forever. Plus, they have, I think, a microphone, and we're going to let the members of the audience ask questions. Let me get a chance. Well, let me say a couple things. I am excited to be here because Kings Mountain was a very, very. Is this working? Is this working or not?
It is.
Okay. I don't think it is. Oh well. Sorry. Thank you. The other was working. No. I wonder if I'm in a bad spot. Okay, now it's working? There you go. Okay. Well, we may not use the second microphone. We just have you yell. Okay. It's small enough. Anyway, I started to say that Kings Mountain is a very famous battle. We have Bill Fortune, who lives in Montreat, and Steve Hanser, who lives in Asheville, and I have written a series of historical novels. And the third volume on Washington, which is Yorktown, is going to come out this November. And when you look at the history of the Revolutionary War, the war in the South was really, really important. And it also illustrated in a way that I think a lot of our modern intellectuals don't want to deal with, why the Founding Fathers wrote the Second Amendment, which does not give you the right to bear arms. It's a very important distinction. The Constitution does not confer the right to bear arms. The Constitution says that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed upon. And it's clear from the writing that the Founding Fathers believed that the right to bear arms was one of the unalienable rights that came from your Creator. And the reason in their generation was really practical. They had just fought an 8-year war. They knew that if they had not had the right to bear arms, the war would have lasted about a weekend. And so they had lived through what it was like to take on a dictatorship and defeat it. And in fact, Madison in the Federalist Papers talks about the fact that the Americans were armed in a way that Europeans could not be because the European governments didn't trust their own people. And I think sometimes we forget, and this is part of the great struggle underway with the modern left. The modern left wants to use government as an engine to fundamentally change our society. We wanted to use government as a system that fundamentally sustained our society. There are radical differences. Obama's all upset because the Supreme Court may throw out Obamacare. And I've been upset with judges, but the difference has been the opposite. I've been angry at judges who change the Constitution. Obama's angry about judges who may keep the Constitution. It's exactly the opposite attitude. We had one Supreme Court justice recently who commented that she thought that the U.S. Constitution was obsolete. And she cited the South African Constitution as a better document, which requires almost total ignorance of reality in South Africa. But it goes back to this fundamental question of the modern left is inherently hostile to the core values of the American system. And that's part of why I had endorsed the marriage amendment, because I think we have a right to sustain values which have been around for 3,000 years, even if it makes some of our friends on the left uncomfortable. Now, the president went to Chapel Hill yesterday, and this has begun to be a standard Obama performance. This is a man who believes in giving you your own money and expecting you to be dumb enough to be grateful. And what he said to the students yesterday was essentially, yes, it's true that you can't find a job. Yes, it's true that gas is so expensive you can't afford to go for an interview. And yes, it's true that I'm going to crush your future with massive payments on interest because I've run up such a big debt. But in the interim, if the only thing you look at is interest on your student loan, I'm going to borrow from you in the future to give you a lower interest now. So you should be grateful to me that I'm going to allow you to not pay me for a little while, and then of course you'll pay a lot more, but by then I won't be president, so maybe you won't notice that I was the guy who did it to you. Obama is basing his entire campaign on a belief in the American people's inability to add. I think if we can get across the idea that 2 + 2 = 4, we're going to beat this guy. And he wants us to believe 2 + 2 is whatever his fantasy life requires. So Cylindra would really work. It's kind of like when I was debating why we should have an American energy policy, and I kept talking about drilling. And Obama gave a speech and said, drilling is not the answer. Does anyone remember what his answer was? It was algae. Now, I guarantee you, we could have volunteers at every gas station in North Carolina this summer. And when people drive in, we could say, would you like a bottle of Obama's answer? And we would get across overnight. So I would look for an opportunity to go to Chapel Hill to answer Obama. I would start out by pointing out to the students that my goal is to have an economy so strong that they can have a job. That when they have a job, they'll actually have the money to pay off their student loans. In fact, when they have a job, they'll have their own insurance plan, so they won't need to be on their parents' insurance plan. In fact, they'd even be able to move out from living with their parents. I try to tell reporters, it's always the parents who react to that particular idea. And I'd like to get gasoline prices low enough that they could afford to drive to the interview. I mean, there's just a whole series of opportunities here. And I think we have to be prepared to compete with Obama head to head and to prove to people that his promises are being paid for by us. I mean, he's not giving the American people anything. He's taking away our future, charging us compound interest, and asking us to be grateful. And so I think this is really, really important. This may be the most important election in our lifetime. Because I think a re-elected Obama would be a disaster. And so I think it's very, very important for us to focus on this. Let me also say that I think we need an American energy independence plan so that no American president ever again bows to a Saudi king. In fact, I would like us to become so independent that we could say to the Europeans, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Indians that they have a challenge in the Strait of Hormuz, but we don't. And that they had better step up to the plate and take responsibility because the time has come for other countries to also do their fair share in developing what we need to do in the world. Now, I will also say, and I'm going to write about this in the near future, I do a weekly newsletter. And I noticed that when the president apologized to a group of religious fanatics who were in the process of killing young Americans, something which I thought was a totally inappropriate thing to be doing, because the Korans that were being burned, in fact, had been already mutilated by Islamic prisoners and used to smuggle information out of prison. But what I was struck with was the Obama administration has now prepared an entire briefing in the Army on how to handle the Koran and how to treat it as a sacred object. And I'm going to publish this in the near future because it's fascinating. But what really got my attention was the last slide in the briefing, which says, we will hold as, what others hold as sacred, we will treat as sacred. Now, in Obama's case, he means the Koran. But my challenge to the Obama administration is simple. Are you willing to apply the same standard to America that you want us to apply to Afghanistan? So let's say, for example, what others hold as sacred, we will treat as sacred. Does that mean we can put crosses back up? If the president thinks it's good for people in Afghanistan to pray 5 times a day, should American students be allowed to pray once a day? If the president doesn't want to attack Islam, does that mean he will quit attacking the Catholic Church? And by the way, every right to life institution, I was at Louisiana College, which is a Baptist institution. The president of Louisiana College said to me that before they would implement Obamacare, they would actually close the college because they are not going to violate their religious beliefs under pressure from a president. So I believe that we have an enormous amount at stake in this election. And I want you to know because again, I've been at this a very long time. How many of you have ever been to an event I did here in North Carolina? Have any of you ever been to a Republican event or a campaign event I've been at? I'm just curious because I keep running into folks from all over the place who've been around. Because I've been a party builder since 1960. I actually started thinking and studying government and politics in August of 1958, and my dad was transferred to Fort Benning, and that's how I got to be a Georgian. And so in the 1960 campaign, I was active as a volunteer, went down to the local party headquarters. At that time, the entire Georgia Republican Party was slightly smaller than the number of people in this room. So it's been a really long process. But in that setting, I think that it's very, very important that we understand how important the party is. We lost this state in 2008. I think we're going to win it this year, but I think we're going to have to run a campaign very hard to make sure that that happens. We need to pick up some congressional seats here, which I think we can do. I think we can pick up the governorship. And so there's a lot of reasons to be very active this year. It's a very, very important year for us. I will tell all of you, because I do believe in being candid and in trying to talk about reality. I think Governor Romney had a very good day yesterday. And I think we have to be honest about that. And I will tell you that Cliff and I have been talking about it. We are committed to helping defeat Barack Obama, period. We are also committed as citizens to taking big solutions to Tampa and arguing that the Republican platform has to be a solidly conservative platform that has solutions big enough to meet the country's requirements. And so in that sense, we're going to continue to move forward. But we're going to do so within a framework where I think it's pretty clear that Governor Romney is going to be the nominee just based on the sheer weight of yesterday's evidence. And we need to work in a way that we can find a way to focus on defeating Obama, not focus on fighting ourselves. But I'm very grateful. The people of Delaware were good. Everywhere Cliff and I have been, people have been terrific and been very, very positive and very supportive. And I'm going to continue the rest of this week here in North Carolina. We had, I think, between the two of us, it's 20-some events scheduled. And so I feel like it's important to come and to report to you and to be with you. Let me just give you one example of what big solutions would look like. If we developed an American energy program to make us independent, we have new technology for drilling, which is revolutionizing the production of energy. We went from 7 years of natural gas to about 125 years supply. The same process of drilling has allowed us to go from 150 million barrels of oil in North Dakota to 24 billion barrels of oil in North Dakota. So there's tremendous opportunity here for us to develop federal land and to develop offshore and to literally produce so much oil and gas that we become independent of the Middle East. Now, that has a couple of huge impacts. The first is it creates several million jobs. Some people have estimated as many as 6 to 7 million new jobs. So you begin to solve the jobs problem. Because if you move people off of unemployment, off of food stamps, off of Medicaid, off of public housing, and you put them over here, earning a living, paying a check, it's the biggest single step you take towards balancing the federal budget. Now, I know a little bit about this because I am the only Speaker of the House in your lifetime to have helped balance the budget for 4 consecutive years. Yeah. The second thing that happens if we develop this kind of effort, and let me say, in terms of unemployment, North Dakota now has 3.5% unemployment. Excuse me. Which actually overstates it because they have 16,000 jobs in the oil industry that they can't fill because the 3.5% who are unemployed have the wrong training. So one of my proposals is that we modify unemployment compensation so if you sign up for it, you have to sign up for a training program while you're getting the money. Yeah. Now, and that said, we create jobs By creating jobs, we put people back to work, we take them off government funding, we begin to move back towards a balanced budget. If we do it right, as we move back towards a balanced budget, we could take the oil and gas royalties and put them into a debt repayment fund. Harold Hamm, who has helped develop North Dakota, estimates that there are between 16 and 18 trillion dollars, not billion, trillion dollars of future royalty payments to the federal government for federal land and for offshore, which means in Noah's life and the life of the even younger 7-week-old that's over here, we would be debt-free. We would have paid off the national debt. And that means they wouldn't have to pay taxes to pay interest on the debt. It also means, in one strategy, you quit bowing to a Saudi king and you no longer worry about Chinese bondholders because you paid them all off. And that's an example of a big solution that I think makes a big difference. So I think this is all doable. I think it's very hard work. One of the big surprises to me in the last year and a half is it is much harder to move new ideas into the political dialogue than I thought it would be. And that's one of the things that I'm going to continue to focus on and continue to work on. Because I think the problems we have in Washington and frankly in Raleigh and in most of our government are really problems of solutions more than of willpower or money. They're problems of what will work in the future and how do we get them to work. So what I'd like to do, if I could just for a minute, is toss it open and let people ask questions. I may ask you just to yell your question and I'll repeat it so we don't try this microphone.
Mr. Gingrich?
Yes.
What would be the biggest argument against the debt repayment plan that you just outlined?
I think that, well, there'll be two arguments against the debt repayment plan. One is those people who don't want us to be energy independent. They'd rather buy them, well, like Obama, who's asked the Saudis to pump more oil instead of asking people in the United States to pump more oil. He's told the Brazilians he wants to be their best customer for their offshore oil rather than develop more offshore oil in the United States. So that's the first group. The second will be the group who will say to you that to get to a balanced budget without the royalty money is so hard that because it suggests that we're actually going to have to be very tough-minded about spending. But I think we have no choice. If you look at what's happening in Greece and Italy and Ireland and Portugal and Spain right now, and for that matter even Holland, I mean, the Europeans are about a decade ahead of us on a trail to disaster. And Spain now is at 22% unemployment. 50% of the young people in Spain had no jobs. And for Obama to be promising to borrow even more money to give it away is a sign that he is utterly and totally irresponsible about the future of the young people in this room.
Mr. Speaker, what do you think is the most important item in moving forward philosophically or ideologically with the Republican presidency this fall?
You mean, when you say moving forward, you mean winning, or do you mean in terms of what it should implement?
And what it should look like?
Well, I think the most important challenge for all of us is to find a way to focus on creating jobs. I mean, I thought it was fascinating that Obama goes and talks to these students yesterday and says nothing about creating jobs. And yet the greatest problem that these young people are going to face when they leave college is there's not going to be any work. And of course, he can't promise to create jobs because all of his policies are killing jobs. So it's a very, very big challenge. But I would say the next president has to start by saying, what am I going to do every day to make it easier to create a job in the United States? And that's going to be, I also believe the recovery will start late on election night when people realize Obama's been defeated. And I think people will start changing their investment patterns and their hiring patterns literally that night.
Mr. Gingrich, there's reports that you're going to
I'm not going to talk to the press. I'm talking to these guys. And anybody who's a non-reporter is allowed to ask questions.
I want you, not Romney. However, if the force
By the way, I shared that.
if he gets the nomination, how do we make sure and your philosophies get heard and implemented.
Well, look, I mean, first, thank you very, very much. And first of all, I think I'm pretty noisy. So, and I've been noisy for a long time. And my grandmother said I was noisy when I was 4. So I think you can count on my remaining noisy. And talking both with the Romney campaign and with the Republican National Committee, I think they expect me to be pretty noisy. But second, because I want to really make this clear to every conservative in the country, you know, this is not about perfection. You know, we can all have things we disagree about. But if you ask me in terms of picking judges, if people say, is Romney conservative enough? Well, you pick who Romney's going to pick as a judge, and you take who Obama's going to pick as a judge, and you just, you know, I mean, you're talking about 2 different planets. And you can go down a long list like that. And again, if we elect our Senate, and we elect our House, and we elect our President, that still doesn't mean we're not going to be in a fight in the middle of January, because the truth is, it's very hard to get all this stuff done. You know, I had hardline conservatives mad at me when I was Speaker. Okay. Now, we reformed welfare. 2 out of 3 people went back to work or went to school. We had the first tax cut in 16 years. And we balanced the budget for 4 straight years. But I wasn't conservative enough. I mean, I'm just saying, it's the nature of the American system. When you have 435 House members, 100 senators, a president, a vice president, you have all of our friends over here in the news media, most of whom make a living in part by finding out who are you mad at. I mean, they don't run around all day and say, who are you happy with? Because that ain't a story. You know, it's the old man bites dog is a story, dog bites man isn't. Well, you know, Newt and Mitt are happy is not a story. Okay, but if they so there's a natural tension in how you govern, and I think and you have to recognize what's happened to Scott Walker in Wisconsin. I mean, if we elect a conservative team this fall, that doesn't mean the left is going to go away. They're going to do everything they can to fight us next year. So I think everybody's going to have lots of opportunity to be active and to be involved. And I'm pretty confident that we'll have a chance to have a really big impact. Yes, sir.
I'm a local pastor in the area, and first of all, I've been praying for you. And second of all, just wondered if there was anything specific that we could be praying for you for your family.
Yeah, I think what Calista and I would say, and what my daughters would say, because we're concerned with our grandchildren, and concerned about Calista's mother, who's now 80. I think if you can pray for us to have health and to have wisdom and to have safety when we travel. I mean, we travel all the time. It's a little sobering, and I think we average being on the road 6 days a week. And so we'd be very grateful for your prayers.
Definitely be praying for you.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to ask you, based on your remarks, are you saying that you're going to withdraw from the race? Because I really want to encourage you not to do that. We know the one that's in charge of everything, and along with the pastor's prayers and everybody else with that 180,000 people that are supporting you, we want you to hang in there. But do you think, I just saw on the news today about the Catholic protest that's going to be taking place this summer, that that's not going to make a difference in how people are going to choose their candidate?
I think it will make a difference to some extent. I certainly hope that it will communicate to the country at large how serious the attack on religious liberty is. And I think then in that sense they can support. And look, I'm going to be very, very active as a citizen, but I also think you have to look realistically at where we are and what the options are. And I think, you know, Governor Romney yesterday had 67% in one state, 63% in another, 62%. I mean, these are very impressive margins, and I think you've got to be. You don't want to take people down a path that I think in the end has no future to it. And I'm really worried about beating Obama. I mean, I want to do as a citizen. I mean, much more than any personal ambition. I've had a reasonably good career. My ambition is for the country and for my grandchildren, for people like Noah. What is your baby's name?
Jackson.
Jackson. Okay, so Noah and Jackson. I mean, I think, you know, that tradition. That's what motivates. That's why I ran. Was for Maggie and Robert and for Noah and Jackson, and that's the decisions I'm trying to make now. Yes, ma'am. So. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker,
I'm willing to recognize hallelujah.
I'm sure
none of us understand, but I'm sure all of us really appreciate the sacrifices of your family and this long haul that you've been putting in and what you're going to be doing continually. My question is a bit philosophical because I don't understand. Everywhere the conservative responses have been applied in our past, they've worked. Philosophically, it works. Logically, it works. Why is it that so many people just don't get it?
Well, you know, there was this guy that used to get drunk on Friday nights, and every Saturday morning he thought he had a brain tumor. And it was really hard. It took a long time for his friends to get across to him that there was a direct relationship between a hangover and drinking. And unfortunately, what you have today is a modern elite in our academic world, in our news media, and in our bureaucracy and our judges that believes things that are false. Let me give you an example, because I stick to energy because energy is so central to our whole economy, and it's central to our national security. And it's a great intellectual case. People on the left have talked about a concept called peak oil for the last 30, 40 years. And peak oil is the idea that there's a definable amount of oil on the planet. They would think of it as being like my glass of iced tea, okay? And that at some point you will have drunk half the iced tea. And that was called peak oil, okay? And so liberals came up with all of these government schemes to get cars that go 120 miles to the gallon, and et cetera, because we had to deal with this crisis. Well, we now have new drilling technology. And as I said, we've moved from 150 million barrels in North Dakota to 24 billion barrels in North Dakota in the last decade. The people who are developing North Dakota believe with another generation of drilling technology, we're going to be at 500 billion barrels. Now, just in North Dakota. Now, that would suggest that peak oil is a concept. There used to be a story about the astronomer who came to town, and he gave a lecture, and he went to the only hotel in town, and about 2 in the morning he was wakened, and it was one of the people who had been to the lecture, and they said, I couldn't remember. Did you say that the sun was going to go into a supernova and burn up the earth in 4 billion years or in 6 billion years? And the astronomer who was half asleep said, I said 6 million. And the guy said, thank God. Now, we're going to discover that we have enough energy that if we're willing to develop it, not even in Jackson's lifetime or Noah's lifetime are we going to get anywhere close to peak oil. But on the left, I mean, the president the other day, you have to read this one speech, he actually gave it 3 or 4 times. But he's given a speech on energy, and you can pull it up at the White House, the text. And he says, drilling is not the solution. He was off on algae, okay? 3 pages later, he says, natural gas has been a tremendous breakthrough. And we're going to create this is Obama's language, we're going to create 600,000 new jobs in this decade with natural gas. Now, I happened to be campaigning in Mississippi when he did this, and so I went over and filmed a drilling rig for natural gas and put it on YouTube. And I said, how does a White House staff write a speech which says drilling is not the answer? Now, let me tell you about natural gas. And I don't think that they fully understand that it was drilling that got natural gas. And here's what happened in natural gas prices. So when I talk about gasoline being below $2.50, I want you to understand where I'm coming from. We've had an 11% increase in natural gas production. And the result is the prices dropped from $7.97 a unit to $2.05 since 2008. If you had the same price collapse in gasoline, it would be $1.13 a gallon. So when I said $2.50, I was being very timid and cautious. And yet, intellectually, the left this can't be true. I mean, if this was true, we could be just happy without government. And so that, starting with that attitude on their side, which is, how can you just allow, this is why, for example, the left hates homeschooling. I mean, what if the kids just get educated? We once, Jack Kemp and I, and this is really Kemp's idea, but I was his supporter. We had a proposal to allow poor people in public housing to earn sweat equity. And if they would actually take care of the public housing over time, they would acquire property. And Barney Frank got up, he was opposing us. And Frank got up on the floor of the House, he said, do you realize if we allowed the poor people in the public housing buildings in New York to earn the ownership of their public housing apartment, it would be so valuable. They would become millionaires, and they wouldn't be poor anymore. And we're all going, yes, that's the idea. But you can tell in his worldview, who would we take care of if everybody was rich? That's how big the difference is. One or two last ones. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I know you've said in the past that our tax code is a monstrosity that punishes productivity and it takes away the illusion. But even under former President Bush and a Republican government, we haven't had the political will to deal with it and to come up to scrap the tax code and come up with a fair tax or a black tax. If we elect a Republican president, do you think that we now have the political will to do that, to do exactly that?
I think there are two different strategies, and I would recommend both of them. One is something that Hong Kong does, which is create an optional flat tax. I think Steve Forbes, who I wrote forward for a book a couple years ago, discovered this. It's very hard to pass a pure flat tax because everybody fights to keep their particular tax rate. And because people distrust politicians, when you say to them, well, I'm going to take away your tax break, but look how good this is going to be, they're kind of going, wait a second, I actually have the tax break. I'm not sure I trust you to make it good. So it's very hard to get to a true flat tax, although Paul Ryan's offered a sort of partial flat tax in his newest budget. In Hong Kong, you have a choice. You can either pay a pure flat tax, or you can keep the current tax code and have all the deductions and all the paperwork. And I think when we tested it, about 84% of the country liked the idea of having an option. The second thing I'd say for everybody who wants a fair tax, and I'm good friends with both John Linder and Neil Bort, so I have a pretty good sense of where that comes from. I think that what the people who want a fair tax should ask for is a national commission that would spend 2 years building a computer model so that it would be very easy for any American to put their budget into the model and learn exactly how their life would change. And once you have the model, then have a local commission in all 435 congressional districts to hold public hearings. Because when you talk about a jump as big as abolish the income tax and go to a transaction tax, people will not do it unless they thoroughly understand it, because it's a gigantic leap. And so that would be my advice to people who want that kind of tax. Yes, ma'am.
Speaker Gingrich, I'm so honored to be here today. Thank you so much for coming to Cleveland County. I am a freelance representative for Cleveland County. And I have to ask this question because I know that a lot of us in here probably love Sarah Palin, and I think we love you. I have to wonder, if Sarah Palin had come out and endorsed you, do you think that it would have made a difference in your campaign?
I might have. I mean, her Todd did endorse me, and she said very, very kind things about me. Yeah, and she said positive things, and he did calls for me and sent some emails for me. So I'm very grateful to them for what they did. Look, I just think there are times when the mountain gets bigger than your ability to climb it. And in this case, we had a wonderful campaign and have had remarkable support from 180,000 people have supported us at Newt.org financially, which has been very humbling, frankly. But I think you also at times have to look at, Governor Romney created a big machine, and he raised an immense amount of money by Republican standards, which is actually a fairly tiny amount of money by Obama standards. And I think ultimately this is something we're going to have to confront. I mean, all of us are going to have our work cut out for us, because what do you have for the first time in American history? So you have the most radical president in American history trying to build a Chicago machine. I mean, we have never had at the national level a machine on the scale. I think they have some amazing number of full-time employees already. And it really is an effort to say to the rest of us, we know that you wouldn't let me win, and this is from an Obama perspective, that Obama knows he would not win a fair election, so he's going to try to avoid it. When a president goes out to raise $1 billion, he's telling you that if he can't drown us, he can't win. And I'll just close this thought. This is typical. Again, let me go back to why strategy matters. I like talking about gasoline for a very specific reason. Everybody sees it every day. You can't, I don't care what Obama does, he cannot buy enough advertising to convince you that $4 is cheap. And so you're reminded all day, every day, this is the most expensive president in American history. And I'll close this, but I predict to you, the most devastating single commercial this September and October is real simple. It is a woman standing in the street and saying, I can't afford 4 more years of Barack Obama, and my family can't afford 4 more years of Barack Obama. And then you just show unemployment, you show debt, you show gas prices, and I'll bet you 80% of the American people are going to say, you know, that's right, we can't afford it. With your help, we're going to carry North Carolina, pick up some House seats, win the governorship. I am honored to be here with you today. I look forward to getting pictures with you individually. Thank you very, very much.